Hey, come see us do live shows January 3rd in Los Angeles, Honolulu after that, Baltimore, Maryland, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. We have special guests with us. Leonarda Jonie, is that how you say your last name? I got it. She's Montenegro-born, New York-based stand-up comedian, but you live here now, right?
I live here now. Yeah.
Okay. And she's a comedian, actor, writer, producer. She is known for her unapologetic and often polarizing humor, touching on a wide range of topics, including growing up in Albanian in the Bronx, body shaming, and identity. Her fearless approach to tackling taboo subjects has earned her the title the most banned and censored comedian as she pushes the limits of free speech and comedy. Welcome to the show, Leonarda. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Jimmy.
Well, let me show people a little taste of what we're talking about.
Sure.
So someone sent me this, and that's what made me want to call you in and talk to you. So let's watch.
Those chicks are so...
Okay, hang on, ready?
Those chicks are so pissed that Trump won, shaving their heads, screaming that they're going to go on a sex strike. You can't threaten people by taking something away that no one wanted in the first place. Also, I don't know what you're doing going on a sex strike. Some of you really need a hunger strike.
Damn. That's what gets you the most banned and censored comedian. Have you banned and censored?
I should say most banned and censored female comedian, because I think there's some men who've taken that title. But yeah, I've been banned from a lot of clubs.
Really?
Yeah, I lost my first Instagram account. They
join the
deleted
club.
it.
Yeah,
because I was talking about the trans women and how that was a bunch of BS when it was not okay to talk about that.
So now it's okay to push back on that.
Now that's okay. They've given us that, and they're distracting us with a war that nobody's fighting anymore. Everybody's aware that these dudes are dudes and nobody cares anymore. So they're like, okay, we'll give you that, while they keep pushing the agenda on stuff that actually does matter.
Well, whatever happened to Crossdressers? When I was a kid, I used to watch Phil Donahue specials, and they would have Crossdressers on all of a sudden. Now they just like the flu disappeared during COVID.
Yeah.
Crossdressers have disappeared, and they're all trans now. Now, I think that there are a very, very small percentage of people who are trans. I've met some, and I'm like, okay, that you're definitely trans. But what you're talking about is that what I'm talking about. What happened to all the crossdressers? Now they're all calling themselves trans, and they want to go invade women's spaces. You're against that, right?
I'm totally against it, and I'm against the rest of us having to pretend that something that's not real is real. I mean, this to me is 1984 communism, where you have to deny the reality that's in front of you in favor of the propaganda. This is how they break you. This was my first wake up, because I was in New York, and that was the peak of the trans mind virus. And I'd go to these women's meetings that were for women who were trying to like recover from certain things, you know, and it was exclusively for women. And all of a sudden we started having these men who were identifying as women coming into this space. And I'm like, sorry, you can't sit here and relate to what it was like when I got my period at 13, because you never had that. Okay. You might have it in your imagination, but this isn't okay. And all my friends, the female friends, were like, no, you can't say stuff like that. And I remember I would just swallow and keep down how I felt, to the point that I didn't even know it until at one point I was walking with my friend in a field, and I just started screaming at the top of my lungs, "You're a man!" And she was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, I can't support this. And then I just broke. I broke. It was that moment where my soul and spirit said, no more. I'm not lying anymore. I'm done lying to myself. I'm done lying out loud just because you're going to persecute me. And I lost all my friends. So,
well, I know what that feels like. I told the truth about COVID and Russiagate and the Ukraine war, and that was the end of lots of my friends. But I made better friends, actually.
Oh, absolutely. Made better friends. You find your tribe. You find people who have also survived this sort of onslaught of your psyche and your spirit. I think to me, this is also what led me into Christianity, which I don't have to talk about, but it did. If it was the one place that I found that said you have to tell the truth no matter what. even under threat of death. And when I first found this with like the martyrs who would die because they wouldn't deny Christ, I was like, I don't get it, dude. Just tell them whatever they want to hear and go live your life. And I finally put the pieces together when I saw what was happening to these kids under the trans agenda. It was like,
puberty blockers and things like that.
The puberty blockers, the bottom surgery. I mean, you're cutting somebody's dick off. Okay, that's what you're doing, and you're calling it gender affirming care. You want to talk about 1984 Orwellian speak? Here it is. So when I saw what was happening to these kids, because so many of us were afraid to stand up against the agenda, I go, oh, that's why you have to tell the truth no matter what. Because if you don't, and you don't face the persecution, it's going to be your kids that suffer, and it's going to be too late.
And so now, I mean, my stance has always been, I grew up where I started comedy in the 90s when people used to make fun of gay people. They didn't make gay jokes, and gay people were actually second-class citizens.
Yeah.
And they had to, use the power of persuasion and different things to make sure they became first-class citizens, which they are now, right? And I never thought...
Well, they're royalty now.
Well, almost, right? Yeah, it's like everybody wants to be gay because it gets you, it opens doors and gets you things, right? But, I'm gay. I've got a thing for Jude Law. Anyway, but I was never, discriminating against gay people never thought you should discriminate against them in marriage or housing or employment. But that it's not a Rubik's Cube to figure you're not for discriminating against gay people, but they'll tell me, are you? You're not.
Sure. Why not? Everybody else gets discriminated against. Why are you special? I feel everybody should be fair game. Okay, I don't have to, this is the thing. I don't have to discriminate against you. But it should be my prerogative. Hate is covered under free speech.
Yeah, the whole hate speech thing I'm pushing back heavy on that.
Well, it's a loophole. It's a loophole because they do want to undo free speech, absolutely, and they can't just go for it right on. So they have to appeal to your emotions. And if you look, a lot of these people who are on the side of this propaganda, I don't even want to say the left because there's things on the right too that are just also just as emotionally unhinged. But for this part of it, they're people on the left. They're so emotional. They're so emotionally driven. And what's happening is these people who run this propaganda are hacking their emotions. They're going, oh, these poor people are discriminated against. So for like trans women, for example, these are clearly men. You can see them. They're testosterone driven. But what do? They dress them up as women, and then they borrow from the vulnerability that we feel women possess and go, they're even more in danger. So then there's a lot of women who are very emotional, and they're looking at it and they're going, these are ladies that need to be protected. And they ascribe the quote unquote violence that would be aimed at them as if it's a man aiming violence at a woman. And you're like, this is between men. Okay. Whatever's going on is between men. And also these dudes in dresses get real violent when you don't acknowledge their made up identity. Real violent, and towards women.
So, I think it's unfortunate that I'm not an expert on the trans movement whatsoever, but it seems like the people who get the attention are the loudest, most testosterone fueled people,
right?
And they actually do a disservice to people who are actually trans. That's what it looks like to me. That's what it looks like to me.
I have some thoughts on this. I mean, one thing that people don't realize is the number one growing demographic in the trans movement is actually white teenage girls. Because they used to have eating disorders. That's not cool anymore because everybody wants to be fat now. And so they're like, okay, how do I, they're at the bottom of the totem pole, right? It's at the bottom of the totem pole now, right? If you're white, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. So how do you take the elevator up top? trans. You're the top of the victim status. All of a sudden, everybody's interested in you. And, teenage girls, they take mental illnesses and it spreads like a mind virus.
Right. Well, there's,
and so, and why
it's
is
definitely
this
a social contagion with
it's
the trans
100%
thing.
a social contagion. Now, why is this so devastating? Because they're chopping off their breasts. And then at 25, they're realizing what they did and there's no going back. So you're telling me that I have to be compassionate by helping a person whose brain isn't even fully developed to do permanent damage to themselves, and then they're really going to want to kill themselves.
Yeah. So they're coming out with these studies now, which they're trying to suppress.
Yep.
That show that the affirming care and all that stuff actually doesn't. It's not working. It doesn't reduce their, because that was always the threat that they'll kill themselves. They'll be dead.
They said that to,
Right.
again, hack our emotional systems.
Right.
Once again.
So wow. So did you get banned from you get banned from comedy clubs in New York?
I didn't get banned from comedy clubs in New York. I wasn't there long enough for that to happen, but I did have people want to start fighting me after, because I was doing, this was 2019. It was the peak of the trans insanity. I was going up there basically saying these dudes are men and they're mentally ill, in a funny way. And I would have these Afro punk lesbians in the front who were like, "Whoa." And I was like, you're not going to do anything. Just sit down. Okay. The reason you're a liberal is because you're physically weak. That's the reality. You need the government to fight for you. But it gets weird. I mean, shout out to the Stand in New York. They still have me go up. They're pretty cool. And it's probably the least left-wing club in New York, but that's not saying a lot. Sometimes I got a 50-50 ratio there. Sometimes I go in, I get an awesome crowd who's down for all this. And the other time you can hear pin drops during my set, and I just see laser hate coming out of these eyes, and I'm just like, I'm not gonna stop until I break you down.
I find it fun for me to go up in front of a woke crowd and do like I would do jokes about Kamala Harris being a queen, and by queen I mean she was installed by the oligarchy without any votes from the public, stuff like that.
Yep.
And they'd be like, oh,
how could you say this?
It's fun to burst a bubble or make fun of the vaccine and the COVID nightmare and people wearing masks and all that stuff. It's fun for me to go up in front of a crowd that is not ready for that. Isn't that fun? That's kind of, there's a fun to that, right?
It's fun if you've got at least some people who get what you're doing.
Yeah, you got to have some.
Because then there's like this nice, you've got a little bit of backing.
Yeah.
When the whole room is afraid,
yeah.
You're like, all right, I don't want to go to war every time I'm on stage.
I'm with you. Yeah. Okay. Well, and so how long did you do comedy in New York?
I did it for about 2 years before the pandemic. Then the pandemic started. And so then I moved to Austin, Texas, because it was way more open. And that was a great scene for the first couple of years. It was like really alive. And then it kind of got a little weird in a different way, with like people just wanting to go on Kill Tony and get famous right away. Mm-hmm. And you were just like, okay, because you have a good 60 seconds doesn't mean you're ready to headline the country.
Right.
This is a little inside baseball for people.
Fame before you have an act is not a
fame
good
before
thing.
you have an act. And it's so irrelevant. I think what happens is we see these external accolades and we don't realize that what we want is all the things that get you to that place, meaning the work that you do to develop the talent, to develop an ability. It's the ability that you want, but we're in a totally different situation now where we just want fame, thinking it's going to validate our existence the way. And I think people want fame because they're looking for salvation,
Well, if the people think that fame is going to heal the hole inside them and fill in all the cracks in their personality.
Right.
And when it actually does, when you get fame, is it shines a light on all your personality defects.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're not ready for it, everybody else can see it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I do I've reflected on this a lot because, I used to think this way too. In my younger 20s, I was an actress and I just thought, if I just get to be successful or whatever. And I've realized that, what I was looking for is is immortality. That's really what you're looking for, because death is coming. No, not to be dark, but death's coming for everyone, you know. And so we're trying to find this thing that will be like, okay, I'm going to live forever. And then when you get it, you realize, nope, you're still going to die, you know. And how do you realize that? You look at all these people who have been famous, you know, Richard Pryor. I mean, they hit the peak of comedy thing. Didn't save them. You know, right. And so we got to come to this reality. It doesn't mean, you know, don't do the things that you want to do and the work that you want to do. But there's a totally different way you go about it when you care about the work and what you're doing as the actual work, without thinking about this glory that you're going to have. Because the glory is an illusion and no one's going to remember you. A few people might remember you and laugh at a joke, but it doesn't freaking matter. You know, the things that matter are your personal relationships, family. I heard you talking about kids. I feel like, you know, a lot of people my age, we were totally psyoped. I mean, I can't tell you how many of these like videos I saw where it's like a girl starts off dating a guy and she gets pregnant and then she ends up like a heroin addict. And you were like, oh, don't get pregnant. You're going to end up a heroin addict, you know? And it's a lie. It's a lie. And I see a lot of these women who I'm like, we've been lied to by feminism. That's one of my big things.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, it made us think that all the things that make us women were somehow inferior to the qualities that men have. Huh. And instead of, you know, really honoring the things that make us women and valuing those and investing in those, we decided to shed all that and be like, I can do all the things you do as a man, but better, right? I can outcompete you in the education market. Women are getting most of the degrees. Sure, it's for ridiculous things like gender studies and the smell of foreigners. And if you don't like it, you're racist kind of thing. They're outcompeting them in the marketplace. You know, they're making tons of money. They're like, I'm a boss bitch or whatever. And then they do all that stuff. And then they get to this place where they go, why do I still feel the way I feel, which is not good. You know, why am I carrying my dog around in a burlap and like burping him like he's a baby? Oh, you want a baby, honey, you want a baby. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can know this because you fast forward, you know, really fast forward to the place where you get to all the career stuff and everything. Let's say you get there, but you don't have a wonderful relationship and a family. Does that feel good? No, then you have to know what you really want despite all the propaganda and the brainwashing. And, you know, I had this experience myself, like people would give me their babies to watch. And I would love watching the babies. You feel like this love. You're like, oh my God. And then I'd have to feed the baby. And suddenly I'd be like, oh my God, I can't make this baby eat. And if this baby doesn't eat, it dies. And then I give the baby a Cheerio and he takes the Cheerio and puts it in his mouth. And I'm like, I'm fulfilled. And you're like, why did I go to college? This is so much better. You know, and I do think women should be educated because they're in charge of raising children. But we've been educated to hate all the things that are actually, I think, wonderful about women.
Oh, wow. Okay. So are you married?
I'm getting married. I did get married at 25, but that was a huge mistake. I knew nothing. I was like a neophyte in the world, you know. I knew nothing about picking men, you know, because again, you know, I had this training that was like, I don't need you to do nothing for me. You know, I got it. And then you do get those kind of guys who like don't want to give you anything. And then they'll claim to be feminists because it lets them off the hook from any kind of responsibility. And you're like, oh, you're just a loser. Like that's what you are. So I learned a lot through trial and error. And one of the things I've learned is if you, and this doesn't matter if you want to have kids or not, but if you look at the person you're dating and you go, I would never have your children, you need to get out immediately, because that was the way that we screened out loser genetics. It was the women were the gate. You know, we were the gate. We were like, hey, if you don't have the ability to thrive in the world and to fight and to protect and to nurture, I can't be with you because, you know, if I get pregnant, I'm out of commission for 2 years.
Right. I guess so.
So
Yeah.
that whole thing, the whole dismantling of the gender relationships that really held our society together was because of the CIA-led feminism that just became this hatred of men. And I'm not saying that there weren't things that we needed, right? Women need protection from bad men. This is true. But we also need protection from the government. And the only thing that can defend us against both of those things are good men. So we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater. We saw, some dudes who were totally abusive in their power, and we're like, this is all men. But the only thing that's ever saved a woman from an abusive man has been a good man.
So, you mentioned the CIA-led feminism.
Yes.
When I found out that, Gloria Steinem was CIA.
She was totally CIA.
Isn't that amazing?
Yep. And then she told women, this is why I'm so disgusted by these people, okay? Because they knew what they were doing, and they brainwashed them and they manipulated them. She told these women, hey, if you don't get a job and go to work, you are a traitor to all women. So women who had no desire to be in the workforce, women who were very happy having families, who were very integral to that part of life, entered the workforce. Doing what? What are you doing? You're a secretary, and that's worth not raising the next generation in a way that is really important. I see a lot of these young girls in their 20s who are like, oh, I have to have an abortion because my career is going to be derailed. I'm like, what's your career? You're like, oh, you're in middle-level marketing. That's a made-up job. That's not real. No, nobody's going to remember. You're a cog in the machine. The most significant impact you could have is on your child, way more than any of that crap, So, that's how I feel about it. And it took me a long time to get there. I hope to spare younger women from having to take that long.
And so you just moved to Los Angeles, right?
I did.
From Austin?
Yep.
How are you finding Los Angeles?
I don't get out much because I do a lot of work at home, in my home, So when I do get out, I'm like, there's a lot of Mexicans here.
Yeah.
What?
You
mean
she's
Los
Mexican.
Angeles?
My wife's 100%.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
They
I
are
love Mexicans. Yeah.
25% of this room
Angeles.
is Mexican.
Yeah. It is called Los
And that's the way I like it.
Yeah. It is called Los Angeles. Right? Didn't Chris Rock used to have a joke about that? It's called San Diego, not Gus Johnson. Right? It was something like that.
It's cool though. LA is pretty cool. I haven't really run into crazy leftist stuff here, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know,
Yeah,
man.
that's what I was
New York is the epicenter. You wouldn't.
Well, Kurt would tell me that. Kurt, my co-host Kurt is usually here, but he's sick today.
Oh,
And he said that when he went back to New York, he said it's even worse.
worse.
It's worse in New York than it is in LA.
It's like full-blown communism in New York. Full-blown. That's why people can get away with doing all kinds of heinous stuff on the subway. And then, they're there was one guy who had been booked 300 times and let out of jail 300 times.
So that's the thing. So this deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill.
Yeah.
And then you're supposed to just
Ignore them.
Ignore that.
Even though
this has been a systematic deinstitutionalization. They used to have 500,000 people in mental hospitals in the 50s, and then they started letting them out. And by the 80s, it was now there's somewhere around 400,000. Used to have 500,000 mentally ill in mental hospitals, and if you were mental on the street, they'd commit you, right? If you were mentally ill. And then they stopped doing that, and they started letting people out. And now 300,000 people are in prisons who are mentally ill.
Yeah.
So we didn't stop housing them. We just shifted it from mental. And then the other rest of them, we put them on the street. You're right, like that guy who just got killed on the subway by
Jordan Neely.
He had been. He was assaulting people, and
he broke a woman's nose, a 65-year-old woman's nose. But don't worry, he wasn't a threat. He was just a Michael Jackson impersonator.
And so. But the problem is that guy actually asked for help. He was like, hey, I'm hearing voices. Can I have help? There's no capacity to help. They just kept putting him out on the street. And then you're a bad person if you recognize that and say, this guy should be institutionalized. And so now Eric Adams in New York is trying to change the law to make it easier to have someone committed. But that's not really, that is a problem. But the bigger problem is, we don't have the mental hospitals. We closed them down. We got
Wow.
rid of them.
Yeah.
And that's what but now instead of that, they'll either put him in jail or they'll put him back out on the street like that guy was. He was arrested 42 times.
Yep.
He was begging for help and they wouldn't give him the mental. So instead of, giving $100 billion to Ukraine for a fucking bullshit war that we started, why don't they take $100 billion and give it to America? We built mental hospitals and we have social services for the mentally ill instead of putting them on the streets and on the subway to cause. I mean, you see people all over the place and and then so people then equate homeless people with mentally ill people who are a lot of times on drugs to self-medicate.
Yep.
And most of the people who are homeless work. At least half of them. We covered this.
Wow.
And you don't see them. They live in their cars. They live in the shadows. They live in, shelters. And so instead of taking care of those people, those homeless people who are mentally ill, we just let them roll. And then you're considered a bad person if you think we should do something about that, which we should.
Yeah.
You're supposed to. You're a better liberal if you if you just try to ignore it.
Yeah, because everything is about making you feel morally superior without actually doing anything. Just by, it's such an easy way. We feel so good. Oh, I just parrot this thing and I say this thing that everybody wants me to say, and then I feel good about myself. I don't have to be a bad person. And it's it's a failure to
virtue signaling.
Yeah, it's totally virtue signaling, and it's a way of making yourself feel good without doing anything. And a lot of this stuff is because of a breakdown of just the communities. There's a total breakdown of communities. And again, this has happened through a mass migration push, which actually started after, I think it was the 1964 Hart-Celler Act, which switched the immigration demographics and actually favored immigration from non-Western countries. Why? Because their culture is completely at odds with the Western European culture that actually built America. Despite, the slaves built America, that's not true. They were less than 10% of the population. They were even less than that. So it's impossible for that to have happened. But they favored that because what that does is it goes and splinters communities. And then you don't have those bonds between people where you look out for your own. So you imagine you live in a tight-knit community and somebody in that tight-knit community is mentally ill. What does the community do? They gather resources to help them. You've got a widow on your block. You know her. You grew up with her. She needs groceries. I'll go get her groceries. I know who she is. Total anonymity, total breakdown. There's no connection between neighbors.
It's on purpose.
Of course it's on purpose. It's totally on purpose.
That's the oligarchy wanting to create chaos.
Well, you can't overthrow a government when you can't trust your neighbors.
Right. That's right.
That's what it's about.
The Prime Minister of the UK just said, hey, we've been running an open borders experiment and the people deserve an answer why we're doing this. And
what a load of crap that is, too. Who's we? You're part of it.
He's the one who did it.
You're part
That's
of it.
the irony.
This is talk about like absolute psychopaths and insanity. This is what I compare them to, right? It's like a man who beats you and then sees you all bruised up and goes, oh, what happened?
Yeah.
Come here, let me take care of you. That's what they're doing.
That is exactly what you're right, because we showed a video of that same prime minister 4 years ago saying that we should have open borders and we should, the immigrants, we should welcome them and all that stuff. And I'm not, again, this is not about demonizing immigrants because it's our foreign policy that creates people desperate enough to leave their own country and go to another country. We do that in Venezuela. We do, NAFTA wiped out workers in America and in Mexico.
Yeah.
And it all went to the corporations, right, who are actually running things. So we're on
that and our foreign wars and
our foreign wars,
NGOs that fund these migrations. This is the other thing. People are like, oh, why are you against immigrants? Well, this nation was built on immigrants. These were immigrants who came over on their own. So what does that mean? You're going to get a different quality of immigrant when the person knows they're going to have to go through all these struggles with no help versus they're given $10,000. The whole thing is prepared for them. They go, don't worry, we'll get you in. What are you bringing in? You're bringing in the laziest type. So then they come here and they just stress out. It's not just here, it's in Europe and Canada. Stress out all the social service, organizations and all that these, Canadian citizens and European citizens and American citizens have been funding for generations. And now they get to that age where they need it and there's no resources for them.
Yeah, I mean, I would push back on that. Again, I'm not an expert on immigration, but I know what they're doing. All the immigrants I know are very hardworking people. So
a lot of immigrants who came over on their own. Yes,
but they are flying in. We've covered that on the show. Hundreds of thousands.
Yep.
And so this is definitely some kind of WEF plan, World Economic Forum, oligarchy, George Soros plan to flood the Western world with and create chaos.
Yep, and destabilize them.
And but they've also first they destabilize Libya, Iraq. They destabilize Syria.
Right.
They destabilize Afghanistan. They Somalia, Yemen. They do Sudan. They're doing it to Venezuela. They're doing it to Mexico. They're creating this problem, and because chaos always favors the establishment. Yep. And so I think it's you have to be careful. So I always try to don't get into that position where you're hating on someone lower on the economic ladder than you, because if you are, good chance you're being manipulated by someone higher on the economic. I always try to say join together, and so we can keep our ire and our focus and our revolution against the establishment and the oligarchs who are creating this problem.
Yeah.
Right? Hey, come see us do live shows January 3rd in Los Angeles, Honolulu after that, Baltimore, Maryland, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.